Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters on France 24. I'm Nadia Massi. Here's what's coming up. The rehabilitation of a dictator. Saudi Arabia is expected to invite Bashar al-Assad to the Arab League summit next month, 12 years after the Syrian president was kicked out of the bloc at the start of the country's brutal civil war. 2 months since the Turkey earthquake and hundreds of thousands are still homeless. We meet women fighting to hold their families together after the disaster. And the sarcophagus of Pharaoh Ramses II arrives in Paris for a long-awaited exhibition here in the French capital. First, is Bashar al-Assad's isolation on the world stage coming to an end? The Syrian dictator has been shunned by the international community since 2011, when his regime brutally crushed anti-government protests, triggering the civil war in Syria. But in recent months, particularly after the earthquake that struck northern Syria in February, a growing number of countries have been coordinating with Assad's government. And in the most significant development so far, Saudi Arabia is expected to invite Assad to the Arab League summit next month, 12 years after Syria was suspended from the organisation. So why is Assad apparently being welcomed back into the fold now? Let's ask our foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. And Doug, so why do you think people are apparently reaching out to Assad now?
Yeah, look, a lot of this has to do with the big word, right? Geopolitical realignment. What does that mean? In simple terms, one big factor here has been that recent rapprochement, if you will, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered by Beijing. That has sort of shuffled the entire deck in this region and changed sort of the future prospects for alliances throughout the Middle East. As long as Saudi Arabia and Iran were at loggerheads, nothing really was going to move. We know that Bashar al-Assad has relied heavily on Iran and its proxies throughout his civil war to suppress, oppress the opposition. So it was really a big dividing line. The earthquake, on a more cynical note, the recent massive earthquakes in both Syria and Turkey back in February have also sort of lent a little more impetus to this realignment. Saudi Arabia sent aid to the government-controlled city of Aleppo after those quakes. It was the first such aid in many, many, many years. So on those levels, you have a lot of realignment, but you also have just the fact Saudi Arabia has said itself that the status quo as it sees it was untenable. That's a direct quote. And why? You have in the region, the Arab world, a lot of war fatigue, a lot of just they're fed up with the civil war, and a lot of local parochial self-interest and opportunism by countries within the Arab world, not all wanting to get things back on a sort of normalized track. So you've had Assad himself in the past couple of months, both visiting Oman and then a month later visiting the United Arab Emirates, both allies in the region. And you've had Egypt's foreign minister also meeting with his Syrian counterpart just in the last week. All of this showing shifts in the region and a desire on the part of many nations to change what has been that isolationist status quo and bring Assad back in from the cold so he's not a pariah anymore.
We can't forget, though, Doug, that, during the civil war, Assad's regime dropped bombs on civilians, it used chemical weapons, hundreds of thousands of Syrians were killed, yet he remains in power. How did he manage to survive?
Well, the answer is simple. You don't have to look far. It's Russia. And that is really boiling it down, oversimplifying perhaps, but in a nutshell, there was a time not too long ago, back in 2015, when Assad's days were really numbered. It seemed like he was on the verge of literally implosion, oblivion, if you will. The jihadist opposition, rebels controlled vast swathes of Syria. His government seemed to be on the back foot. And then lo and behold, Putin comes in with his military and air support campaign, really propping up Assad and his regime. And to this day, you have the Russian military presence still there, still backing Assad, and being really the big geopolitical prop, if you will, for this pariah regime. That's why he's still in power.
And as you say, it sounds like Saudi Arabia is going to welcome Assad back into the fold now. Is there any chance, do you think, that Western countries will follow that lead from Saudi Arabia and welcome him in more broadly as well?
Yeah, not in the short term and not in the medium term. And why is that? First of all, the West has been, what do I say? Obviously, I'm talking about U.S. and Europe and some other countries as well. There's not going to be a normalization. There's not going to be any financing of the reconstruction of the country, which has been destroyed in its civil war. And there's not going to be any lifting of sanctions. And the reason for that is simple. There was a United Nations Security Council resolution 2224, which basically called on the regime for free and fair elections with the participation of the Syrian diaspora, for a rewriting of the constitution, among other prerequisites. None of those have been met by the Syrian regime. On the contrary, so the West says to engage with Assad right now, as things are, with this status quo, nothing change, without holding his regime accountable for what human rights groups say are massive violations of human rights, massive violations of international humanitarian law, would be horribly hypocritical, both on a moral and a political level. They are not going in anytime soon. And I will just note, there are some countries in the Arab world as well, including Kuwait and Qatar, notable among them, which are not normalizing relations, which are not following the trend of their neighbors in the Gulf region.
Thanks for your analysis. Douglas Herbert for us there. Now, in other news this week from Syria, the US military has carried out a strike, killing a senior Islamic State group official in the northwest of the country. He's been named as Khalid Ahmed al-Jabouri. In a statement, US Central Command said he was responsible for planning attacks in Europe without providing more details. Some 900 US troops are based in northern Syria as part of the coalition fighting the remnants of the Islamic State. In other news, authorities in Iran have arrested a man who attacked two women, one of whom wasn't wearing her headscarf, in a video that's now been seen by millions of people. However, both of those women have been detained as well because they violated Iran's strict dress code, as Leah McGuinn now reports.
A viral video seen by millions, showing a man dumping yogurt over a woman and her daughter in a small shop in the Iranian city of Shandiz. The apparent reason for the attack, both women showing their hair. The man in the video has since been arrested for the assault, but so have the women for flouting Iran's strict female dress rules. On Saturday, President Ebrahim Raisi addressed the nation to remind the Iranian people that the hijab is the law.
The important matter is that today we have a legal mandate. The legal mandate makes it mandatory for everyone to follow the law. If anyone, for any reason, does not have a strong belief in the hijab, the obligation to follow the law is still what creates a lawful society.
Growing numbers of women have defied authorities by discarding their veils after nationwide protests that followed the death of Mahsa Amini in September, who died in police custody after allegedly violating hijab rules. An increasing number of women are now seen unveiled in public around the country, risking arrest by doing so. Videos of unveiled women resisting the morality police have flooded social media. Under Iran's Islamic Sharia law, women are obligated to cover their hair and wear long, loose-fitting clothing. Those who violate said law face public rebuke, fines, or arrest.
Now, it's been 2 months since the 7.8 magnitude earthquake rocked southern Turkey and northern Syria. The United Nations says it's only been able to raise a quarter of the $1 billion it needs for relief and reconstruction, meaning many families are still living in tents. This report takes us to Turkey's Hatay province to see how women there are coping with the immense physical and psychological challenges 8 weeks on.
These few makeshift tents represent a place of support and solidarity for many women here in Hatay. Since the earthquake struck on February 6th, they found themselves lacking necessities which they feel uncomfortable asking for in crowded aid centres.
There's no bathroom, no toilet, no water here. We have nothing. That's how it is. There are a lot of things I need. We don't have underwear. We don't have clothes.
While they come to terms with personal losses, the burden falls on these women to cook and keep up with domestic tasks for their families, all while looking after children and the elderly. While helping them to process their shock and grief, this doctor provides basics such as menstruation products and contraception. She says more women are having genital health issues because of poor hygiene conditions in the camps.
Since all aid is distributed in public spaces, in zones where everyone is around, women find it hard to ask for the products they need.
Many women also fear for their safety. The Turkish Workers' Party has set up a safe place for vulnerable women and LGBT+ people in this displacement camp.
tutabilmek ve aynı şekilde onlara güvenli bir alan oluşturabilmek.
In order to maximize their safety, many of our friends, volunteer friends, keep watch with us in the tent area with the banner you see behind me, keeping this place safe.
Güvenliğini alıyor.
For the time being, activists and doctors say they haven't noticed a particular spike in domestic violence or abuse since the disaster, but women's rights groups warn it's only a matter of time in a country where violence against women is prevalent. In 2022, at least 327 women were victims of femicide, according to the news site BNet.
Finally, if you are a budding Egyptologist and you do happen to be in Paris at the moment, don't miss the exhibition that's showing at La Villette right now, where the wooden sarcophagus of Pharaoh Ramses II is on loan from Egypt. It's a rare opportunity to see the king's coffin, which, as Caroline Lamboulay has been finding out, bears the marks of its 3,000-year-old history.
It's the centerpiece of an exhibit that's opening on Friday in the French capital. The sarcophagus of Ramses II, one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. The artifact, which is around 3,000 years old, hadn't left Egypt for several decades, until it started a world tour in 2021 as part of a traveling exhibit.
The chest is far more ancient than Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, and it's here in front of us. It was taken out of Egypt once in 1976 or 77 because it had to be restored. It was brought here to France and they were able to save Ramses and the coffin. And now we are so lucky to have this loan, so in a way Ramses is coming back to France.
In the 1970s, the mummy of Ramses II was shipped from Egypt to France, where it was welcomed like a head of state. Infested by fungi and bacteria, a team of French experts nursed it back to health using X-rays.
France and Egypt share a very long-standing friendship, and there's also long-standing cooperation when it comes to science, heritage and archaeology. This is what created the trust we see today with this loan Egypt is making to France, rather than to another country.
This time, it's just the sarcophagus that made the journey. The mummy, which is too fragile to travel, remains in the Cairo Museum. The reign of Ramses II is synonymous with grandeur. It was he who commissioned the temples of Abu Simbel, now one of Egypt's most iconic sites. Back in Paris, visitors will be able to dip into this history as of Friday with the help of virtual reality to rediscover this chapter of ancient Egypt.
And that's a wrap for Middle East Matters this week. Thanks very much for watching. The show's back at the same time next week.